You know us. We tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. We are Legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us. We are anonymous.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Adrian. Let's first look at the impact COVID-19 probably has. We don't know yet the final outcome of this pandemic. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but we know already that it will have a changing effect, changing on economies, societies. It's not just to be compared with the economic crisis which we had to pass through 10 years ago. The effect will be much similar to World War, and actually all countries in the world are affected. So if we look at the impact, of course, we first see the impact on global economic growth. Even in the most optimistic estimates of the IMF and OECD, we will be back to the output level of the end of 19 only at the, in the best case, only at the end of 21. So look at the debt which we are loading on our shoulders. The world was already indebted at an amount of over 300% of GDP. Now the rescue programs of the governments represent another $10 trillion, which will be added to our debt load and will have to be in some way be repaid by future generations. I'm also, of course, looking at the unemployment, which and the impact on livelihoods. We know many people, according to the ILO, about 50% of people in the world will be affected, combined, taking the combined effects of COVID-19 and the fourth industrial revolution. And finally, not to forget the figures. I mean, we look at the statistics, we see more than 500,000 people who have died. Just imagine the personal tragedy which is behind all those cases. So we have to be very careful not just to look at the figures. Now, when we look at COVID, I think we should distinguish between three phases. We have the three R's: restrain, which means to fight the virus, the hot phase. Most countries are in today. Then we have recover, to go back to a kind of new normal. And finally, the reset, which means to define and to design the strategies which should lead us in the after-corona phase. What is the objective? What kind of world do we want to build? What do we know? What did we learn? I think the world which we want to create with the Great Reset has to be much more resilient. It has to be because security, people will demand for more security, physical security, health security. It will have to be more inclusive. We had already a big gap before the crisis started. This gap will be tremendously increased. So if we want to avoid some kind of social revolutions, and we have seen the signs of anger on the streets already the last weeks. So we have to address this issue to create a stronger inclusiveness. And finally, more sustainable, because we know now that the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis. The World Economic Forum, by the way, has warned the world related to the to possible pandemics since years, and actually 3 of the major organizations now in the fight against the virus, like the Global Fund, particularly also CEPI, all those organizations were created in Davos. So we know that the next crisis may come on us, and we have to be better prepared. So what does it mean in practice? 5 things, 5 priorities. The first one is we have to redefine our social contract to integrate more inclusion. We also have to make sure that we integrate much more in a social contract our responsibility towards the next generation. We cannot just think of the debt, leave all the solutions and to be paid for by the next generation. So the social contract, and in the social contract, we also have to look at one specific issue. So COVID will create again a gap between the so-called industrialized and emerging countries. The emerging countries, at least some of them, suffering much more compared to some of the countries which have a well-established social safety net. Then second, so it's a social contract. Second, it's the decarbonization of the economy to protect us against let's say, an environmental virus. And here we will publish tomorrow, by the way, a report which shows clearly that there is no contradiction between taking care of nature and particularly creating the need to create jobs and to invigorate the economy. Just to give you one figure which has been calculated, if you take an investment of $300 billion or euros, it could create in the nature-based economy something around 400 million additional jobs. So, social contract, green economy, but number 3, and that's a major part also of the book, because, you know, I published 4 years ago the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. All those technologies are very much advanced now by COVID. Everything will be digitalized, which can be digitalized. So how can we use the technologies to address the challenges, but at the same time make sure that we create the necessary ethical, human-oriented principles around those technologies. So finally, what is the role of companies in this new post-COVID era? I think we are moving from short-term to long-term, from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. The COVID crisis has shown that companies who invest into their vitality instead of prioritizing short-term profits have performed much better. And that's what the stakeholders will expect in the future. And I should add at last the need for much stronger global cooperation. COVID has shown us that we are globally interdependent, and I think it's a wake-up call to work in the future together to address all the consequences and to create a reset in our economic, social, ecological. You know, the forum is a community of communities, big global stakeholder communities, community we integrate governments, business, international organizations, civil society, our young global leaders, our global shapers, and I could go on. We are also involved into about 100 different activities or initiatives at this moment. All this will be integrated into a big work stream. The Great Reset will serve as a platform to integrate all the different stakeholders, to integrate all the different aspects. Because if we talk about the Great Reset, we know we cannot address all those issues in a very compartmentalized way. I think everything is interwoven. The fourth industrial revolution, for example, with the issue of the future of work, and so on and so on. Our work in the forum will be very much determined by an effort to create new ideas, to present those new ideas at the annual meeting 21. I want to highlight the book itself is much more an analysis of what happened and what could happen and what will happen. But we have to find now the necessary responses. And here we need new innovative ideas, and we have to integrate everybody into this process. It has to be an open process. So that's the reason why I'm so keen to provide also a forward-looking dimension to this Great Reset initiative by integrating the 10,000 global shapers, leaders between 20 and 30 years old, who not only leaders, I mean, they represent society in 400 different cities of the world. So definitively, to be now precise in the response to your question, definitively the Global Competitiveness Report, the Gender Parity Report will be influenced by the other work and by our considerations related to the Great Reset. Let me start with the second one. When we look at the tremendous challenge which we have in creating this Great Reset, I think all stakeholders of global society are challenged. What we have seen was a kind of, how shall I say, dominance of business in global affairs in the last, at least in the last 2 decades. Now this is balancing out. We have the return of government, government even taking participation in government, in companies, in any case attaching conditions at safeguarding measures. What does it mean for us and for our approach? I think we will succeed only if it's a completely open platform. It cannot be governments alone, it cannot be business alone. If you look at the issue of environment, even if you look at the issue of creation of vaccines or remedies and so on, it's always a cooperation between governments, business, and I think it has to be supported by the great public, by civil society. For us, very important is to have a forward-looking voice, because if you take the median age of the global population, which is below 30 years old, here we talk about long-term perspectives, and we have to engage the young generation. And also not only the enthusiasm and the support, but also the ideas of the young generation. For this reason, by the way, following up also in the framework of our cooperation with UN, the Forum has created a digital platform which is called Uplink, and this is a platform aiming at integrating the young generation entrepreneurial ideas behind the 17 different SDGs. So what are innovative ideas of the young generation related to global warming and all the other, let's say, global challenges which we have? Related to your first question, yes, I already integrated it into my answer. It's necessary to have a very open approach. This cannot be a response of elites to concerns of the great public. I think we are at a rupture point where we have to make sure that we have a comprehensive, all-inclusive approach. Otherwise, we will just be confronted with a climate of social unrest and possibly revolts on the streets or revolts from the next. When we address all those issues, innovation, creativity is very important. And we know innovation and creativity doesn't come normally or always from governments. It's mainly entrepreneurship. So we should not underestimate the role of entrepreneurship in addressing all those issues. So on the one hand, we have to create probably or certainly more social safety nets. The government is very much challenged. We may have to look at our fiscal systems, but we always have to keep in mind not to restrict the entrepreneurial spirit of business. So it's a fine balance between the two. On the one hand, to have the necessary rules. On the other hand, to ensure that the economy is thriving based on entrepreneurship and based on. If we look at the present situation, we have actually three interrelated situations. First, we have the impact of COVID. Second, we should not forget that after a long period of economic growth, we were entering a period of, I wouldn't say recession, but of reduced economic growth, just taking the economic cycles. And then you have the fourth industrial revolution, which, as I wrote in the book 4 years ago, when I coined the expression, the fourth industrial revolution, which has a tremendous impact on business models, on society, and on the economy. And you're right. As we described also in the book, many of those technologies, just look at face recognition, just look at the technologies which you need for tracking people, and so on. But then look also what we are seeing now with some of the companies engaged into the research for vaccines, using completely new methods based on synthetic biology. So my observation is that those technology advance fast. Look also at the valuation of the leading companies at the stock exchanges. My concern related to this question is, are we able? We always need for technologies also to create the necessary, I wouldn't call it regulations, but at least ethical ground rules. How can we use those technologies that they are used for the benefit of humankind, and not just for the benefit for one application or one specific companies? You see it in the whole discussion related to some of the leading companies, how to find the balance between, let's say, responsible behavior on the one hand and applying the technology fully. So this is something which the Forum is already, with this network of Centers for Fourth Industrial Revolution, looking at how can we promote those technologies to provide solutions. We have been very active, also actively involved in the whole question of vaccines. How can we promote those technologies, but on the other hand, make sure that those technologies are not used at the detriment of humankind? It's the final transition from short-term thinking to more long-term thinking, and from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. I think it's also the transition, as it has been mentioned, from looking at material improvement of life to a more generalized concept of well-being, translated on a corporate level into ESG measurement, environmental, social, and good governance criteria. And one of the big, as an example, one of the big projects which we have in the framework of this Great Reset initiative is to come up with a more unified measurement system to allow to evaluate companies not only on the basis of short-term financial returns, but how they perform in terms of social, environmental, and good governance criteria. So those are two aspects. I think a third aspect is, and it has been mentioned in our discussion, I think is the need to address those issues from a, if I take a country level, or even if I take the international level, so we have a dialogue integrating all global stakeholders into we talk here about, let's say, the delivery and the delivery system. And the two pillars for, let's say, economic policies in the future, or two key pillars, have to be to create the necessary digital infrastructure. And of course, what I said before, the decarbonization of the economy. Those are the two, the green economy and the digital economy. We certainly, and we also are involved since many years in how we can help particularly African countries to deploy the necessary digital infrastructure. I think there are some countries with which we work together very closely, or have worked together. But coming back to the essence of your question, I feel that the industry, if I make use of the word industry, most changing in the coming years is education. And I would see it, provided we solve the infrastructure question, I would see it not just as a threat, I would see it as a great opportunity. I think we have seen the combination of let's say, education as we are used to, and digital education is probably the best way to prepare people for the requirements of life, but it's also lifelong education. And here, as my colleague already mentioned, Sadia, the issue of skills, and skills can be best probably taught on a large scale by digital methods. But maybe you may I cannot give you a guarantee that egoism will not prevail at the end. I think when you are faced with a crisis, the natural tendency is to put you first. And that's what we are witnessing certainly in the world today. I only can say that the World Economic Forum in many practical ways is engaged into efforts just to prevent the situation you were referring to. And I would say, being quite involved in those discussions, it's even aggravated by the question about the vaccine itself. We don't know yet, for example, is one dose sufficient? Do you need 2 doses? In what interval? Do you have even to be vaccinated every year? Because the antibodies may not sustain for a long time. So it's a big unknown. And I just can assure you, we will try. I mean, that's our role, to look at the solutions in the best global interest. And I think the best global interest is not to increase the divide between the haves and the haves not, between those countries which are industrialized and those which are lagging behind. But let me make one remark here. I think if we look at the location of the production facilities for vaccines, they are very much not in the industrialized countries. They are in, if I'm not mistaken, they are in your country, in Malaysia, they are in India particularly, and so on. So this is really a test case where for the capability of global cooperation. But we can assume that there will be a de-urbanization, and people will have some kind of a tendency to prefer a rural environment again, more to the, let's say, accumulation of people. As far as the refugees are concerned, I think here we are mainly in a situation of restraint. We have to make sure that, particularly, that's one of the big worries, the refugee camps, we do not have too many infections, because with the accumulation of people, this would be really a major human disaster. Let me just, since we are coming at the end, let me just conclude by saying we are at a turning point of humankind. I think we should not underestimate the historical significance of the situation we are in. We know the world will look differently when we move out, hopefully as soon as possible, from the acute phase of the virus into a new situation. Now, we have 3 options for the new situation. The first one is that all the negative aspects which we have seen during the crisis, and I refer to the egoism which has increased, I would say, on an international, national, but also, let's face it, on an individual level, that these negative tendencies will even increase, will continue, and I don't want to be too much a pessimist, but I would say in this case, I'm very concerned about the life of my grandchildren. The second situation is that people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. The cut which we have now is much too strong in order not to leave traces. And then we have the third possibility, to construct a new concept based on the learnings on the observations we have seen, and to create really, and I come back, a more resilient, a more inclusive, and a more sustainable world. So some people may say this is too idealistic, but what other choice do we have? At least we have to try. We may fail, and next generations, or even we ourselves, will have to pay the price for our failure. At least we should try it. And I can just promise you on behalf of the forum, of our partners in governance, business, civil society, and so on behalf of my colleagues, and we will try to be on the constructive side. It will be an interesting journey, a journey which probably will last for quite some time. The annual meeting will be a major factor in it. So I'm looking forward to continue this discussion with you, and hopefully to continue the discussion by showing that we make maybe only small, but at least we make progress.
We thank you for watching this video and ask you to spread the news. Put this video on your social network or link to it so that you can be part of the anonymous movement. Together we are strong. Together we are anonymous.